So my name's Mona Sabay. I'm one of the ChIPs co-founders. Very happy to be here. And for many of you who have been here at the ChIPs Summit before, you will know that by the time my session hits, we drink wine. And so you guys don't get to drink wine by yourselves. We also drink wine. So with that, I would like our wine to be presented to the panelists.
Oh, my goodness.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
I'm going white as well. Thank you.
I'm going to do red. Thank you.
Cheers.
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 Cheers, pardon me.
Cheers.
Panel.
Cheers, panel.
Okay, cheers, everybody.
Cheers.
Cheers. All right. I like that there's a camera there that can show me when my legs
Oh,
are
my
moving.
goodness. Oh.
All right.
You can, like, pull yourself together.
So,
Better.
in the last session, we heard some concrete ideas about increasing the number of professional women at all levels in businesses. The question that we're going to tackle here in this session is, even if all those efforts are adopted by every firm out there, will it be enough? Because you guys know that diversity programs of every kind of flavor has been around now for many, many, many years, and yet at sessions like this, we always lament the lack of progress we're making with our numbers, right? And what particularly drives me crazy is that it's not for a lack of spending. We spend so much money on diversity efforts. In fact, Thomas Cochin, who's a professor at MIT Sloan School of Management, estimates that US companies spend, and are you ready for this? $8 billion on diversity programs annually. Google alone said that they spent $150 million in 2015 on diversity programs. Intel, and we've got a few Intel reps in the audience, I think, invested $52.4 million in 2015. And for that, what do we get? Firms improve their diversity numbers by maybe 1% a year, and that's if they're doing really well. So, what we've got today is what I'm going to call #badass group of panelists who are going to talk about a different way to think about tackling our diversity problem. I was good at math when I was a kid, and so I applied math and did a little bit of number crunching here. And if this is a linear equation, Intel would have to invest $1 billion to get to 50% female representation, and then they would do it by the year 2036. And then we'd still be lucky. That's not enough. We're too impatient for this. So, small, innovative, and you guys, a lot of you are representative of teams like this. Small, innovative teams have disrupted entire industries, right, with much less than this kind of investment. Why can't we do that too? That's the question we're going to answer. So, I'm going to start by introducing our panelists. At the very end there, we've got, you might have seen her earlier before lunch today. She had a really interesting session. Karen Snyder, CEO of Textio. Textio is a machine learning powered text analysis platform. And for those of you who didn't see the demo that she did this morning, I'm sure she'd be happy to show you one later. After that, we've got Patti Fletcher. Patti is a marketing influencer currently with SAP SuccessFactors, and she focuses on changing how bias, diversity, and inclusion is considered in HR and in business. And beside me here, Tammy Reese. Tammy Reese is a product strategist who among a number of entrepreneurial endeavors that she has done, just created a plugin called Just Not Sorry, which is a plugin that encourages more effective email communication. So this is our panelist. I'm going to start with Kieran. And I'm going to ask you, I know that your current focus for Textio is on the recruiting pipeline, although you're going to expand it beyond that. I want you to talk about the decision point, why that's an important decision point, what diversity problems it creates, and what your company does about it.
Thank you. Yeah. So you saw the earlier session. Kind of core to my MO is if we can measure it, we can learn something from it, right? Textio as a product is distinctly not qualitative. It makes a quantitative promise to you about how your hiring will improve. And it's a promise we're happy to keep because the technology works. We started with recruiting among many other forms of text and communication because we saw an opportunity to make real impact very quickly. Companies, on average, keep pretty good data about who they hire. They keep pretty good data about who applies for the jobs that they put out there in the world. And most of them use pretty organized applicant tracking systems to correlate all of that data to the job rack and the job post. So if you're in machine learning, like I'm in machine learning, and you can collect hundreds of millions of these jobs with outcomes attached, you can start to find patterns, and you can sort of quickly evaluate, hey, if we say this is going to double the number of women who apply for a job, does that work? Does that not work? And so it's super quantitative. At this point, millions of different language patterns recognized by the system or being added every day that do exert a statistical difference on your hiring pool. We look at gender, which we talked about this morning, very relevant here, but we also look at ethnicity, we look at age, we look at military status, we look at overall qualification level of the applicant. So started with recruiting simply because we saw an opportunity to make a really big difference with data very quickly, and we've been able to do that. So.
And one of the things that a true story that I can tell you is I was talking to a head of HR for a very large company, 40,000 people, and they had just spent money on a diversity consultant who told them that they need to change the way they write their job descriptions. And she was just like, I don't know what to do. I mean, we've got thousands of managers all over the world. How do I get them all to change the way they do that? And this is what we're talking about, the difference between, going to every single manager and teaching them something, which is great, but it's not scalable, to doing something like Textio. So I introduced them to Textio, and she was like, oh my God, I didn't know what to do. This is going to be wonderful. So, it's a different approach to attacking this in a more scalable way.
Well, one other point I would make about that is that while trainings can raise awareness, unfortunately, there's just not a lot of data that shows that training makes any real difference. Again, we believe in quantitative promises that we can make, and even teaching the best intentioned person some guidelines, when you compare that against millions of combinations in how we actually communicate, no one could keep all of that straight in a training or a checklist, even with the best of intentions. So I come from tech, I don't come from recruiting, very strong commitment to technology in the space. So.
You mentioned that your tool does 2,400 trigger things. How could any one person be trained in those?
It's several million.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, exactly.
So and I do want to say, before we move on to Patti, that we're going to be taking questions from the audience. I expect you guys to participate. So start thinking about your questions now, okay? Patti, so SAP SuccessFactors, you have HR software products across every line in HR. Tell me about performance management, the performance management part. Why is that a problem in diversity, and what are you guys doing there?
Right, and so it is important to note that we are going end-to-end with this, because there is no smoking gun when it comes to diversity and inclusion. Wouldn't it be effing awesome if there was? But there isn't. And so what research has found, very much like the approach you're taking, is understanding where those key decision points of conscious and unconscious bias, and it's becoming more conscious bias, because you'd have to live under a rock if you didn't know there were challenges. And that's where we're focusing. So performance management's absolutely one of those key areas. And we like to flip it into the make it real. So where you're talking about who is applying, who is getting hired when it comes to performance management, it's about how are people getting managed? How are people getting developed? Who's getting invested in? Who's getting promoted? You can tell a lot about a culture by who gets promoted in the organization. So very much like what Karen is doing, we're using text analysis, we're using machine learning to be able to do in-tool training. What research has found is that glass ceiling, absolutely, it's at the board level, but really where it sits for the rest of us is at that middle manager level. those are the folks who are training the new people. Those are the folks who determine whether you and I rise up the ladder. So we absolutely need to give them tools to support how it is they work. It's very difficult to take training, to your point, and then to apply it to your day job if those mechanisms of enablement that you're given don't actually support you. So things like performance reviews, right? So we all know that, we all have seen the same research where I might be, wow, Patti really facilitates and helps. Isn't that wonderful? But my buddy over here, Mike, he drives and leads. I get a so-so review, which doesn't put me in a high potential world, doesn't do well for me during calibration and performance review. But my male friend, wow, he's a leader and he's going to be the next CEO. And there are kind of other components here as well. So, for example, there is research that just came out again that, that we're having pay issues, right? So when it comes to performance reviews, there is supposedly a pay-to-play. Lots of companies don't do it, but they should. So you're typically fighting, if you are a manager of people, with the other pairs in your department. You're fighting over the same bucket of money. And what research is showing us is that around the age of 30 to 35 is when we're seeing the biggest gaps happen, and those follow you throughout your career. So being able to build in, not just from the performance reviews, but taking from other parts of the system, right? The compensation, the actual only fact-based data, which is payroll data, and being able to pull that in. And training that manager, not blaming and shaming, although tempting, doesn't actually work. Instead, correcting behavior. The point of technology is enablement. It's preventing, detecting, and eventually eradicating.
And so you provide data then to the managers?
Both data and then the tools to correct their behavior, right? So it's the, okay, so very much like, you know, here are the words. Patti gets a, boy, she's a good facilitator and helper, and yay, Patti. But it's, that's very interesting, because Patti's data point, I see that she's a female. What other things has she done? So doing things like, for example, cascading. So if I am getting judged by what's in the system, right, so what were my goals for this year, those need to be directly related to what the business was trying to achieve. So setting up that foundation right from the beginning, here are the things I do, here's how it's going to directly impact what my department's responsible for, which impacts what that organization is responsible for, and ultimately up to the company level. It makes it far more objective, and then having those in-tool things around language, around, did you know that 100% of the people you have tagged for high performers, there's not one underrepresented population in there.
It's great.
Helping establish a real meritocracy.
Yes, exactly, instead of a meritocracy. Yes, that's correct.
So Tammy, you have approached things from a different perspective, right? So Kieran and Patti have focused on how to make sure that the decision makers have the data and the knowledge and the tools they need to be able to remove bias from their decision making. And you have created some software to help women present themselves better in their digital communications. Tell us about that and why you did it.
So we really wanted to empower everyone, and though it was targeted towards women, men love our tool as well. And all it does is it underlines, as if it was spell checking, words that when you present yourself using those words, show that you are not as confident in your message as you would like to probably present yourself. And it helps bring awareness in the same way spell check would, that you can write OMG and spell check's going to tell you you shouldn't. You can make the choice to continue with that. But it brings awareness to these words and educates you about how when you say, I'm no expert, or I believe, or I feel, or just, or sorry, how that gets interpreted by the reader. And when we think about email communication, it's only the words on the page that are our vehicle for communication. It's not the tone of the voice, it's not our body language. You lose all of that, and it's only the words. And by creating an awareness that helps people be more mindful about their word choice in written communication, we hope that we're helping train people's brains so that when they're verbally communicating, they can then say to themselves, I want to be confident in my message. I want it to be received from a confident perspective. How can I be using the right words in order to make that happen so that hopefully people see me as a leader?
And I'm wondering if I can jump in here. So I love that, right? Because there are two sides to every equation, and you and I have talked off stage about women don't need to be fixed, right? We don't need to be empowered either. We need to be enabled. We already own our own power. And I'm wondering, it's such a great opportunity to use that kind of thing for the managers as well, right? Yeah. Absolutely. And then build in the cultural components. When you work for a global organization, how I interact with a German developer and how most of the times it's a he interacts with me, like you said, so much is lost in email. It's just a whole new way of being able to communicate.
One of the initial requests was, can you build one that stops men from being assholes?
Yeah. Can you? Can you?
And I said, that one's a little bit more complicated.
But it's not actually more complicated. Like I
meant more complicated for someone who wasn't a PhD in linguistics.
No, but I mean, like I actually want to speak to that point because data is data. If you have information about who's responding to your email, we actually have a beta for email right now around primarily recruiting and candidate communication, but if you know who's responding and you know what patterns are getting positive responses and negative responses, math is just math, right? Yeah. You can find patterns. And so you may have a marketing challenge releasing the Teach Men Not to Be Assholes product. But, but actually the technology is not more complicated. I think there's a lot of power within predictive text. And I think, again, as many of the last session talked about, we talked about this morning, people are mostly good people. They actually do want to communicate effectively and without bias. And so if you come into it with that expectation and you apply the lens of data and outcomes, you can do a lot. It's very powerful.
I think you hit the nail on the head, right? It's kind of like I don't wake up in the morning and go, gosh darn it, I'm a woman. What challenges am I going to face today? And I'd like to hope that a guy manager isn't going to wake up and be like, wow, who can I be a dick to, right? I don't think, right? So let's go for that population. There's definitely challenge, and we might get into it a little bit later, and the research is pretty early, but when it comes to the machine learning component and something we're very much paying attention to, and this week I've been talking a lot of folks in the tech world about this, is the masculinity of machine learning, right? And when it comes to human-based decisions, what are you replacing with technology, and what do people still do? And so even if we're getting some kind of hints or nudges or whatever those things might be called from machine learning, what we're showing is they can be just as sexist as people are. So this is early stage stuff in some cases and late stage stuff in others. It's technology, which I think is the point up here, is it's simply an enabler, but we have to remember people design the technology. So
well, let's talk about that a little bit more.
Yeah.
Two of you are using machine learning to be able to automatically identify language that, what you're doing is you're taking academia that has done studies to show that this is biased language, and then making it available for tons of people.
No, but that's not what it is. And I think that's actually a common misperception. There are products that do that will start with academic research, and maybe a focus group has determined that these 150 words are really bad, so please avoid them. It's very different from that. When you're looking at outcomes, you're looking at how did this document actually perform in the past, what patterns generated which outcomes. It's quite different. I think Patti's point is right on, that you have to be very mindful of your training data in that world, because you want to make sure that you're getting something that is representative of what you're trying to assist with, genuinely. But I think it's a common misperception, the sort of like, well, Rockstar and Ninja are, I know those are bad because, an academic study showed me those, I'll just avoid those, and I'm pretty good. You're actually not very good. Like, you may avoid the sort of obvious cliches, but there's so much nuance to communication that I think academia has mostly failed us here. I honestly think they've made us think it's an easier problem than it really is.
And they've siloed it, right?
Absolutely.
So, gosh, look how much money it costs to hire somebody, right? And then when you bring them in and you're developing them and essentially investing in them, which is so funny about the whole diversity and inclusion training, because obviously they're investing in the wrong stuff, but they're spending the money. But that's tying those kinds of things. So your enterprise systems are going to keep learning, right? So I used this, it resulted in this hire, which resulted in these kinds of metrics in performance management, for example, being able to be achieved. So being able to we don't operate in silos. Functions might, but businesses don't, right? And working backwards from your customer. So being able to tie this kind of information, what's exciting about the work I'm seeing now and doing, and like most people in this room, I've been focused on the topic for an extremely long time, is we're finally moving from the philanthropic, gosh darn it, I feel so good about myself because women and other underrepresented groups are really important to me. There I said it in a public statement and I'm moving on, into the how. Right? Really important. What keeps this going is when we can tie it to actual business outcomes. And that's where academia, I think, needs to catch up a bit.
Yeah, where's the ROI?
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
And so we're mostly lawyers in this room, and we're talking about details of machine learning. Explain to us, and we're going to confuse them because I just finished saying that software is the way to go to create a scalable solution to diversity problems, but explain to us why this could be just as sexist or somewhat sexist if we just leave it in the hands of the machine.
Yeah, because there are algorithms, right? So the algorithms that are being built, if they are not, and I'm not a developer, so, but the way that they're being built, the answers that come back to me, so gosh, just doing some testing and just just regular pronouns like she were called out as sexist. I mean, it was so ridiculous. So, just what's happening is when we get hold of academic data and we don't put it in the context, it's a very, very big deal. It's a real big problem.
So I am an engineer by background and by training, and when you're building an algorithm to predict something, you can only be as good as the data that you use to make the prediction in the first place, right? So the famous example, not related to anything any of the three of us work on, but the Google example where they labeled faces of African Americans as animals, you can really, if you think about it, understand how technically that might have happened if they built their face recognition algorithm primarily on white faces, right? That's simply a training data issue that they didn't have the group of people working on the product that they needed to remember, like, oh, people look different in the world. If we're building face recognition for Google, we should probably use a whole bunch of different kinds of people to build the algorithm, right? Any machine learning problem where essentially you're starting with data that is tagged in some way, so you know this is a person, this is a cat, or you know this job got 30% men applying, this job got 80% men applying, or you know that this employee at your company has been a high performer for 5 years and this one has not, where you have those outcomes, you're only going to be as predictive as the breadth and representation of the data set that you acquire. So I actually think if you pay a lot of attention, I pay a lot of attention to this, to all of the sort of big tech companies right now, Google, Facebook, Amazon, Microsoft, are all kind of in a war to release machine learning libraries for companies to use. You notice they don't give away data, they give away code. Like the thing in this space with respect to bias, but machine learning more broadly, the thing that's really interesting is how good are you at assembling the right data set? That's really what determines, as these algorithms get increasingly commoditized, and maybe some of you have been involved in that commoditization from the legal side, as those algorithms get increasingly commoditized, all of these products, and particularly products that purport to help with bias, are only as effective as your ability to build the right training data. So,
which is why the training with developers is so critically important.
Yeah.
And that starts earlier than when they get into the organization.
And as Patti and I discussed at some point, when you have a greater than 50%, often in the 70 or 80% number of males on your development team, and I, as a product person, we talk a lot about empathy, which is the art of putting yourself in someone else's shoes. It is hard to be empathetic. It is a trained skill. It is something we are all working harder to be good at. But if your entire team is of a particular ilk, it makes it very hard to empathize with people of color, with people of different genders, with people of different sexual orientations, et cetera. So the more your team can itself be diverse, the more probably you will develop software that thinks about that diversity, that has that different perspective.
So that's your first takeaway is you guys go back to your companies, and when your companies are building these machine learning type softwares, of which many of you are, as lawyers you say, well, how diverse is the team who built this software? That's where I want to start with, because I'm not sure how accurate it's going to be otherwise.
And if you're not recruiting those people, talk to Textio about how you can get them. And if you aren't giving them raises or promotions.
No, you can also talk to SAP about it too.
Yeah,
exactly. We'll save that.
So as I said, we're taking questions from the audience. If anybody has a question, I would love to hear it. Otherwise, I'm going to keep going. I see one right here. At first table, yeah. I can't see you, so yes.
So one of our first conversations that we had, a side one to your talk about it, these machine learning programs, and we completely understand that the training data that you start with is fraught with biases of the people who put together the training data. But when you have a machine learning type of software, isn't it going to learn the biases
That's the
of
point.
the people using it? And until you get the users that are then doing the
They start
feedback
from
data
somewhere.
to correct the training database, and you run the risk that you can start with a gender neutral training base, and then your users make the training data, or the data, the subsequent data, even as biased as the users.
Should I,
So the
should I
question-
repeat
yeah,
the question?
Yes. Do you want me to?
I'm sorry.
No, it's good.
we can repeat
No, I have the question. I just didn't know if the whole crowd has heard you. I think
Let's
it's an
repeat the
excellent
question. It's a
question.
great question.
So her question is, maybe you start out with a really broad and representative training set, but if your users aren't a broad population of people, doesn't that itself kind of taint the output of the algorithm over time? And the answer is yes and no. It depends a little bit on how your system is built. So if you know not only how people are using the system, but the outcomes that they are generating with their usage of the system, then if it happened that you had 100 people of the same type using, we'll use Textio as an example, and they all got the same outcome in their jobs, it wouldn't change my algorithm one bit. It wouldn't make it better, but it wouldn't make it worse, right? I would just say, yep, well, what works to hire white men is still the same set of stuff. In order for me to get better as an entire product, and this is true for machine learning generally, of course you want a broad user base so you can learn about a broader range of outcomes. But from a technology perspective, the answer is yes and no.
And I'd like to add the impact of what's known as network effects. So you're right that if all you're looking at is your own data, that's going to be based on your culture. And a lot of the newer tools, the machine learning isn't just on your data and your text.
Yes,
it's
that's
built
correct.
on how can we look at the thousands of companies that SAP is involved in and all of that data and share back that data in an anonymized fashion so that our computers get smarter for everyone.
It's a really good point, right? I think one of the things that our premise is, and I'm sure this is true for Patti at SAP as well, is that you can do better when you're using the intelligence of the entire community. You don't know what they wrote, you don't know how their jobs perform, you don't know what, but if you're using the intelligence and what's been learned from all of that usage, you can do a lot better than if you're just basing it on your own experiences. Where think about the analogy I like to use, we call these learning loops. The analogy I really like to use, how many people have used Waze or Google Maps to drive, right? You absolutely send your signal about where you are on the road up to the core algorithm, and in exchange, you benefit from everybody else's signal, and everybody gets to their destination a little bit faster. And if you're in the network, you're going to perform a lot better. You're going to get there faster than somebody who's just driving without any predictive mapping software to help them. What we're doing is very analogous to that. It's why today, for people who are in our network versus people who are outside our network, the gap in time to fill a role is 17%. It's growing every month, right? So people in the network who are using the whole community across industries, they just perform better. And so you give in your data, and in fact, in our case, that's even an explicit strategy. If you provide us a lot of data, you'll pay less for the product. But if you contribute your data, you benefit from everyone's experiences. And I think that's a good point, that if everyone is broad enough, you end up drawing a broad population. So,
Which is
really
why it's
good
important to
question.
share.
Yeah, great
Sharing
question.
is caring, girls. Other questions? Stand up if you've got a question, because
They have mics.
Oh,
they
there's
have
I just
mics
can't
now.
see them.
number one and number
okay.
two. They're numbered.
number one, I see a person at number one.
Thank you. So I'm the founder and CEO of a legal tech company that just spun out of Stanford.
Yay!
And so I've hired quite a few engineers, and I've yet to find, unfortunately, and it makes me very sad, very many female applicants, and then female applicants that have the qualifications that I need to grow the business. And so I started this program for product managers where they can sit with a developer and get on-the-job training in writing code. but they are also product managers, and so they come from jobs as paralegals working with the software systems that we're building. And it's gotten to the point where I have to figure out a percentile of how much time is dedicated to on-the-job training and what percent of the time goes into product management and operations, which, I need these things done, but I really want the opportunity to learn.
Can I ask you, is your goal to have your product managers become engineers?
My goal is to train more women to be really great engineers, or have that in the pipeline in my company, and also as they leave my company and go on and apply for back-end development jobs. Because I feel like there's a pipeline issue happening, and it's not because of lack of desire, it's because of lack of, I think, just engagement and getting them on a team, which is, in myself as well. I've been on engineering teams, and I'm like the only woman, and it's frustrating. It's so frustrating. And so, what kind of on-the-job training programs have you seen that really work, that can engage people that are not necessarily coming in for a development job, but can, grow into a developer position?
So from my perspective as a product manager of around a decade now, who's very publicly never going to learn to code, I think that you need to make sure that you're taking people who want to learn to become engineers. I think it's important for product managers to be technically literate, but to take them out of a business strategy role and say, I need you to learn to code, might not get you to your goal of having engineers later. When I ran Cyrus Innovation, we created an apprenticeship program for women that were leaving the tech boot camps to do what's known as paired programming with our senior engineers. And we created a program where our senior engineers, who were consultants on site with local startups in New York City, had a buddy that was a female junior engineer, and those companies had the opportunity to hire that female junior engineer afterwards. And what we need to do is start making more programs where we can take brilliant women who are dedicating their lives to coding and create supportive environments like at Stack Overflow / Trello in New York City, where they have a program where female engineers can get interview training. That's all. They come in for what's known as an internship, but all it is interview training so they can feel more comfortable in technical interviews. And how can we start taking this large population of millennial women who are in their 18 to 25, whether they're returning from barista jobs or something else, who are learning a new language called code, and encouraging them to develop that skill and to continue to be supported in developing this new language learning skill so that they can become great engineers a year or two down the line, and realizing that it's going to be an investment. Because what Google did a decade ago with product managers was the same thing. They said there aren't enough product managers in the world. We're going to start taking junior people and training them in this, and we need to start seeing that with women engineers. And I'm going to let
just for the record,
You're going to take it away after that.
The entire concept of apprenticeship can happen within the legal field as well as within the coding field.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, good for you for stating your problem out loud. I think we, especially people who are involved in bias, it's so easy to get the perception that it's supposed to be easy, and it's okay that it's hard. So congratulations for actually bringing your challenge to the forefront, because I think that's a brave thing to do. I agree with everything Tammy said. You've taken an experiment around on-the-job training. It's also okay if that experiment didn't work. You're allowed to have tried something and found that it's not necessarily the right approach. We at Textio also hire very junior in career code bootcamp graduates, essentially apprentices. We have a woman on our team right now who's about to convert to full-time by way of such a program. She's been interning with us, apprenticing really for 6 months now. But I think you gotta get engaged where women who are curious are. You gotta go meet people at those coding boot camps. You gotta go to whatever city you're located in. You gotta go to the university and get to know the women in math and computer science organizations. You gotta go where they are, rather than trying to turn people who may or may not have that as their passion into what you want them to be. But seriously, kudos for giving it a shot. and for stating the problem. It's really hard to do that.
And to add to what Kieran just said, the nature of math and science, like you don't actually have to have had a CS or an EE degree. One of the best engineers I worked with when I was at Pivotal Labs had a nuclear engineering degree. Because if you're good at math and science and you want to solve problems, you're probably going to be good at coding. And it's just a matter of taking that problem-solving skill set and applying it to a new venue.
Do we have a question at number 2?
Yeah, just in general.
Oh, your mic is not on.
In large part for ChIPs, and I think it's great we have diversity panels. Part of my question is, how do we become more inclusive?
Yes.
So we've had 2 diversity panels. I don't see a Black or African American woman on any of these panels.
That's a very good question. I guess I'll take that. And you guys want to take? No. It is a good question. We, as a board, talked about this a lot when we were planning the sessions this year and the speakers this year, and I think we did better this year than last year, but we also haven't done as well as we would like to do. So if there's like a Textio for speakers, I think that would really help.
Innovation Women.
Innovation Women's doing
yeah,
a
it's a
good
really
job.
good platform.
But
We're 50-50
you know,
pledge.
I think
Yep.
that in the same way, it's really an excellent question. In the same way as your advice to our founder is that she has to be where the coders are, and you have to spend that effort on it. I think that's what we have to do. We have to start going to the places where people of different backgrounds are and bringing them up on stage a little bit more. And we've done that a little bit, so I don't think...
They're at Intel.
They're at Intel? All right. Intel's going to be upstage next year. See, it was easy. Anybody else?
But I think something that you bring up that I want to make sure everyone remembers is that we've done a decently good job about bringing to surface a lot of problems with sexism. We haven't solved it. There are still massive gaps. But we need to remember, as we are slowly 1% a year moving our way up into more management positions and otherwise, that the challenges that face women are doubly, if not triply, as hard for women of color, for people with different sexual orientations, and other more minority groups.
And so underrepresented populations are really important, which goes to the go to where the folks are, who you want to hire, who you want to be your customers. There are so many organizations. It's kind of as if I can't live in your white male population, I'm going to create my own reality, and they do exist, right? There's the ASTIAs, the Women 2.0s, where you can go find those engineers who are not getting hired by Google and bring them in. You can go to Innovation Women, this wonderful platform where you can find women of color, women of other underrepresented populations. It absolutely exists. It's just a matter of finding where they are.
And something else is that if you're starting a company, so how many people in the room are either starting a company or thinking about starting a company? Raise of hands.
Not
All right, lawyers.
large
Cool.
population.
I'm used to speaking to tech people. If you're thinking, or you have friends that are, if your first group of 10 people you hire are white men, it becomes harder and harder and harder to attract people of color, to attract women to join a team like that. Think about from the beginning how
It's
you
no
can be
different
dedicated to
if
diversity.
you're creating your team within an established
true. Yeah,
organization,
absolutely.
right? Yep.
Any other questions up there? Number 1, number 2? Okay, good. I'll move on to my next question. So the goal here is to try and have the audience think about going back into their companies and figure out how to maybe use technology, leverage technology for improving diversity numbers in their companies. So obviously technology is not a panacea. It's not the solution, the only solution. You don't just put in a piece of technology and off you go. So tell us about what things they should be thinking about in addition to technology. What are the challenges of implementing a new technology solution?
It's going to be a real shocker here, you guys. Culture, I know. It's shocking. And, someone brought up diversity versus inclusion, and I think that's such an important point to make. Diversity is about counting numbers. Inclusion is about culture. And let's face facts here. It's incredibly difficult to be inclusive. You're going to have differing opinions. You're going to have people who disagree, not only on ideas, but on how they work. So we were talking about, isn't it wonderful when I can start a business from the ground up and hire who I want? That's bias. So, and it's just the same with teams. So really understanding the whole kind of life cycle around a workforce, who you hire, who you attract, who you hire, who you are developing, how you're managing them, all of those different things, all the way to who leaves and when. Really start gathering some data. So one of the key things we have in our favor is analytics. Right? You can do it from a spreadsheet, for crying out loud, but leveraging analytics. The problem with analytics is that where most companies stop. Right? So they do their measurement, they put their wonderful reports out there to say we don't have a pay equity problem, which is fascinating because they're lying. But then they don't change their behavior. But it's an important place to start and to keep measuring, to find out if what you are doing, again, the how you're working, is changing. And one analogy I use, and I've used ad nauseum, but I'll use it anyway, is just stopping at analytics without changing your behavior versus using analytics to understand if what you're doing is working and where you might have challenges anywhere across that leadership pipeline or workforce pipeline is really the equivalent of weighing yourself every week and expecting you to lose weight, right? Without changing how you diet and changing how you work out. But being very mindful of what is the data that can help you with any key challenges. Do you have a diverse team? Is that important to you? Is it important to you because your clients don't look like your team? That's an incredibly important question to ask. And so if you don't have a group of lawyers reporting to you or at your firm who represent who the population is that you're trying to serve, why is that? And starting from are we collecting the right data to actually know? Sit down with your HR folks and find out what is that people strategy. But I'll tell you that if the heads of your firm, if your partners, if this isn't important to them, it's not going to happen in a meaningful way. And that's probably the best place to start and see how it ties to the people strategy and what inclusion targets are they trying to hit, not just the check the box diversity targets.
And inclusion to me isn't just a matter of quantitative. I
Yes.
think quantitative, especially when you choose actionable metrics,
Yep.
helps guide you towards asking questions.
Yep.
But you have to ask those questions. In the product world, we talk a lot about customer development. Employment is a two-way street. Your employees can leave you at any point. They are your customers. You are selling them in a recruiting space or otherwise on joining your company, on staying with your company. And if you're not making sure they are customers that are happy and customers that are satisfied, they will leave. And you have to take the data and then ask them questions. Before rolling out a new program, talk to some people and say, do you think this will have impact? How would this make you feel? And really talking to your wealth of employees to learn more.
Right, and just adding on to that, so one of the things that we love in this country to do a one-size-fits-all approach. It doesn't work. For the first time in recorded history, we have 5 generations of workers in the workforce. That'll go to 4 by 2020. So what a male millennial might say is the reason that he or she left to go from a partnership into an in-house or whatever is going to be very different than me, right, where I am based on my demographic. So also really trying to understand the more specific you can get, right? So going back to what are the questions and therefore what's the kind of data. When it comes to diversity and inclusion, it's just like anything else. It's an investment bucket.
I think how many of you have ever tried to change something you were unhappy with at work? Like, probably the whole room has tried that at some point. How long did it take? Right? A year? 6 months?
Yeah.
2
Wait,
years?
you actually accomplished it?
Right. So
That change happened?
And, the reality is, when it really comes to implementing any kind of solution, whether it's a technology or a process change, it's hard. People hate change. People are busy.
But that's where
Hang on.
Yeah.
People are busy.
Yeah, they have their own change.
They don't like change, even if it's tactical and easy. We put a lot of energy and effort into making it so you don't have to do IT integrations to use the product, right? It's as simple as possible. 30 seconds, you get started. It's still a change. It's a different way of thinking about something you've done in another way forever, right? As long as you've done your job. And I think that's the true difficulty of implementing any change is getting it to be important enough to people that they actually want to change something. I think the reason companies have invested in training as a first recourse is, while I'm sure it's very difficult to plan and roll out a training, it's a lot easier than fundamentally changing a process. It's a lot easier than saying, hey, entire company, there's a new set of tools we're all going to be using. You know, we're not using Word anymore, we're using Google Docs. That's not a hard change to make. Ask anyone who's worked in IT trying to roll out that change, right? So I think there's just a natural impedance, and if you're not working with a group of people who are motivated truly to think that it's a business problem, you'll have a very hard time, even if what you're asking them to do is very simple, because it's just cognitive load, where people are very busy and just having to think about something else is hard. I think that's the hardest part. If you are an advocate for inclusion in a company where it's not a predominant cultural value, you're going to be fighting against cognitive load that people have, because they're people.
Yeah, so that's the point, though. Sorry about culture.
I'm going to wrap up because we are running out of
Yeah.
time. I think that that's a really great way to, and I'm going to ask you guys about a call to action, but I think that's a really great call to action that I'm going to leverage for the closing, and that is that, you know, one of the things that has been proven allows women to move, or people generally, but certainly women to move up from, you know, middle management into senior management, is taking on a role within your organization that is seen as strategic, a change management initiative, essentially. And so my call to action for all of you would be to think about, even though it is difficult, taking on a change management initiative within your firms and organizations, and seeing if you can find whatever solution that you might look for out there that we've introduced to you or otherwise, that you can start championing within your organization in order to try and drive inclusion at a faster pace. So that would be my call to action. We do have to wrap up. I want to see if anybody else has a quick call to action for the audience.
My quick call to action is, a number of you are decision makers and you're thinking about buying software. Please do not buy software that just matches your broken processes and try to fit your broken process into the software. There's data, there's analytics that goes behind the decisions that the software has chosen for the processes, and this comes from a product management perspective. So don't say, oh, we've had this process for 10 years, and we want the software to attach to it. So be open to change in your process when you're including new technology.
Great.
Yeah, we have to stop now, but remember, 75% of change management programs fail because nobody's paying attention to the very fact that you can have the best change thing in place with your vision, but you have to understand that change happens at the individual level. So it starts with awareness. Meet people where they are and measure the shit out of what you're investing to try to get them to move forward, because they all have their own change program they're trying to drive.
The only other thing I would say is it's a sort of a call to action, but kind of a narcissistic one. It has been a huge gift attending this today, like going to the sessions. It's not the world I usually live in.
Yeah.
I work with a lot of lawyers. I would love to hear thoughts or feedback that you've observed just from kind of this exposure that we've had, because you have a very different way of thinking than the tech entrepreneurs that I work with every day. And so part of why I'm here is to learn from the overall conversation that everybody's having. So I would be very grateful to hear thoughts and feedback that people have. So.
Excellent. Thank you very much for the panel. And by the way, we wrote a blog about this, and it's on the ChIPs website, so please go there and read the rest of the story. Thank you.
Great.